Kuzangpala. Today I'll be briefly presenting on the role of evidence in decision making in the forestry sector of Bhutan. Bhutan has always adopted a balanced approach to development, and as a result, the Forest and Nature Conservation Act 1969 was enacted, so that the forests of Bhutan are managed sustainably while also meeting the community needs of forest resources. Empowered by the Forest Act, the Department of Forest and Park Services is mandated to manage the forests of Bhutan, and for its management, the forest can be put under broad classification of the following management regimes. Number 1, protected areas, that includes national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, strict nature reserves, and biological corridors. Number 2, territorial divisions, those areas that are outside of protected area management. And finally, Tobden, mandated for urban forestry management. And for this study in particular, the Tobdens and territorial divisions are put under the same management regime, and this was done with the rationale that both offices have similar work mandates and are considered less protected regime as compared to the protected areas. So why is there a need to study this? Well, forests play an integral part in our lives, as entire generations have gained substantially and will continue to depend on it. But dependency on forest resources also entails sound resource management. While Bhutan's constitution mandates at least 60% forest for all times, the increasing socioeconomic development has put extra pressure on its forest resources. At a global level, evidence-based decision-making has been on the rise in the past few decades, highlighting the need to incorporate evidence in both decision and policy formulation. But for Bhutan at the moment, there is a lack of understanding if forests are being managed based on evidence, and if such evidence are incorporated into decision making. Therefore, there is a need to carry out studies to ascertain the ground realities. Therefore, the study comes with the objective of understanding and analyzing the current practices and use of evidence in decision making. And in order to help answer the objective, the 3 research questions are adopted for the study. Number 1, what is the state of use of evidence in decision making within the forestry sector? Number 2, what forms of evidence are being valued and used? And finally, what are the potential barriers to the utilization and adoption of evidence in the decision making? So this is the research design that I've adopted for this study. The primary data came in the form of interviews, both structured and semi-structured, with the forestry officers of protected areas, territorial divisions, and also the municipality. The secondary data came from the content analysis of forestry legislations and 5-year plans, and a thorough literature review in areas of evidence-based decision making, particularly in the forestry and environmental sector, were conducted. This data then gave the basis for analyzing the 3 research questions, that is, the state of use of evidence, the forms of evidence valued and used, and also the barriers to the use of evidence in the forestry sector of Bhutan. After analyzing this, the conclusions and the discussions are proposed respectively. As for my study area, I took a case study approach, and for this I took the whole country. Purposive samplings were carried out to identify and target forest managers for the online surveys. This sampling technique was adopted as they are entrusted for the management of forest in the country. They are the CFOs, the Chief Forestry Officers of protected areas, territorial divisions, and the Tobden. Out of the 24 interviews floated online, 23 responded for the study. Now, in terms of the results, the sample responded that they always used evidence in decision making, and out of the respondents, around 91% of them were male, and the CFOs were serving on an average of 4.2 years at the protected area and 4 years at the territorial divisions. Out of the CFOs, 83% of them had a graduate degree, either in the fields of forestry, wildlife, or environmental studies. In order to understand how much the participants valued and used different forms of evidence, they were asked to indicate on a 4-point Likert scale that ranged from 0 being not valuable at all to 4 very valuable, and from 0 being never used to 4 as always used. The different forms of evidence were adopted from Limex et al. 2018 and Gale et al. 2017, who had carried out similar studies in Canadian and Brazilian protected areas. To this, it was revealed that the forest managers of both forest management regimes, that is the protected area and territorial divisions, valued legislation and the field assessment carried out by their staff as the most valuable form of evidence that they used in decision making, whereas the consultant reports and grid literature were not perceived that valuable in their day-to-day operations. To all other forms of evidence in decision making listed, the managers responded either a moderately valuable or very valuable, indicating their inherent understanding and importance placed to the role of evidence in forestry management. While the entire respondents valued all forms of evidence in decision making, around 87% of them rated legislations and field assessments as the two most used evidence in decision making. They categorized these two evidence as under frequently used and always used. In contrast, the least used were grid literature and peer-reviewed article, which they categorized under occasionally used. Apart from the two primary forms of evidence used, it was observed that different secondary forms of evidence were also used under differing management regimes, especially for long-term strategic decisions. For instance, the protected area management relied heavily on conservation management plans, whereas the territorial divisions used local area forest management plans and forest management unit plans. In addition to the value and use of different forms of evidence, barriers to the adoption of evidence-based decision-making were assessed using a barrier scale on a 5-point Likert scale that ranged from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The study revealed that although forest managers valued all forms of evidence, not all were utilized in decision-making. The largest one affecting the adoption of evidence-based decision-making were the disconnect between researchers and decision-makers, information sharing within and outside of the department, and lack of trainings to understand and interpret the various forms of evidence. So in conclusion, the study revealed similar findings to other studies conducted in both developed and developing countries, that forest managers valued utilization of evidence, but all valued were not all utilized. The study provides a baseline information for future in-depth analysis of why and how are these evidences being used in managing Bhutan's forest resources. Supporting to the proposition that the use of evidence type depends on differing nature and context of management regimes, it was observed that even the use of evidence varied across management regimes in Bhutan. The need to base decisions on science and evidence concurred among the forest managers. However, one recurring theme across all forest managers was the use of existing legislation, and it is of paramount importance to assess how are these legislations formulated, whether there is a scientific merit in this legislation, and who decides which provisions are inserted. Another major area to delve upon is the field assessments carried out by the field staff, as this form of evidence is widely used for decision making. It is necessary to ascertain the consistency in the results of these assessments. Can the field assessments be replicated by other forest managers or even non-foresters, the stakeholders? Evidence generated can only be accepted by all stakeholders if there is a consensus in the way evidence is collected and used in decision making. And finally, research in the areas of evidence use in forest resource management and governance is still in its infancy. Therefore, there is an urgent need to strengthen research. In addition, science policy interface remains very weak in the country, and there is a need to bridge these two. In doing so, there is a need of an organization at the national level that conducts systematic review and evaluates research findings and evidences of numerous researches conducted in the country and provide policy recommendations at the national level. Thank you.